Greetings to you, dear listeners. Dave here on behalf of the Hallway crew, and we are into summer mode for our recording schedule, which often means, we're working around people traveling and being out of town for different things and being busy doing things besides our normal work, enjoying the different pace of summer. So what that means for us is we are still planning to record some new episodes throughout the summer months, but we're also going to have some times that we're going to add in some, replays from things that we've recorded in the past. And this week is one of those. This is one of my favorite episodes that we recorded called Changing Our Minds. And this was, a good long while ago that we talked about how if you are an educated person, you probably should change your mind. And so we reflected together on some things that we now think differently about than we did earlier in our careers. I hope that you'll be blessed and encouraged as you listen to this one again, perhaps. It is interesting to me, listening back to this old episode, how the sound used to be for this show with the kind of microphone updates that we've had in the meantime. I feel like the sound quality and just the feel of the podcast is very different today than it was then. We do plan to be back in the studio soon to record some new episodes, and you can plan on a schedule of every other episode throughout the summer being a replay versus a new episode. We're going to continue our every 2 weeks publishing schedule, so you can look forward to that. And in the meantime, if you have questions or comments or concerns or ideas or topics that you think we should be talking about, please send us an email at hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. That's hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. We always love hearing from listeners there. All right, I'll play a little music and let's get on to this replay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hallway Conversations. My name's Matt Beamers.
I'm Abby DeGroat.
And I'm Dave Mulder.
As always, we want to thank you for allowing the three of us to be here with you, and we want to thank you for joining us in the hallway. Each week, one of us brings a question or a topic that we try to think creatively around in the context of Christian education and teaching Christianly. We are good friends who love each other and love engaging each other in conversation about our practice. And our deep hope is that you are enriched and encouraged in your own work, and maybe even in your everyday walking around life. Well, we have a long list of topics we want to talk about. We also want to know what hallway conversations you'd like to hear. So if you have ideas or questions or feedback about this podcast, or simply want to share what conversations you're having with your peers, please email us at hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. That's hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. Today's question comes from our friend Dave, who actually happens to be sitting in this room. Right. So here's the question.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Our last few weeks,
right, it's been a while.
Questions coming. Right. So I'll ask the question first, and then I want to tell a little bit of the story of why I'm asking the question. Okay, my wondering for you guys today is, what have you changed your mind about? What's something in education you changed your mind? And here's why I asked this question. Now, I used to put a lot of stock in the idea of learning styles, like the idea that different kids learn differently, and some kids are visual learners, and some kids are auditory learners, and some kids are kinesthetic learners. And I spent a lot of time early in my career trying to arrange things in my classroom practice around that, right? But what am I going to do for my visual learners? And I actually, for a couple of years, was giving kids a survey at the beginning of the year to say, let's find out what your learning style is, And the longer I taught, the more I kind of became unsettled by that because I don't know, there's something about it that just felt kind of weird, felt kind of off. And when I was in grad school, I actually found there's actually basically zero empirical evidence. There's no evidence in the research that says different people learn differently. There's really no such thing as a visual learner. Okay. And which surprised me when I first saw it. And I better link that. So there's actually a pretty good report. And it's from a group that's Science in the Public Interest or something like that. And I'll put it in the show notes because if you're into that kind of thing, there's some really good research that says here's why it's a myth. And basically what I came to realize when I started reading this research was, okay, let's say you're going to learn how to speak Spanish. How are you going to learn to speak Spanish? You're going to learn it auditorily, right? You're going to learn it, and it doesn't matter if you're an audio learner or a kinesthetic. You're going to learn how to speak Spanish by hearing it spoken.
Right.
That is the way you learn. How are you going to learn geography? How are you going to learn the geography of Central America? You're going to do that visually, looking at a map.
Yeah.
And one of my professors in grad school actually, not mockingly, but jokingly says, so what does it mean? Like, I'm an olfactory learner. I have to learn things by smelling, right? It just starts prompting you to kind of ask those questions. And why this all came to mind for me again, there was a video that I saw shared on Twitter. A couple of my friends, disparate friends who don't know each other, shared the same video. So then I watched it and like, wow, that's really interesting. And it was at that same topic, right? Like this idea of learning styles is a myth. And we need to stop perpetuating it, right? The evidence doesn't back this up. We shouldn't talk about kids having different styles of learning. Now, all that said, like multimodal teaching is still a promising practice.
I was going to say, it's not that you can't use multiple methods to present the same information.
Right. And in fact, we should, because it is going to help people remember things better if they can connect with these same.
Because there's all kinds of research also about dual coding and dual processing and mixing the written word with pictures or images or colors.
And so much of it then is matching your methods to the learning target and saying, how am I going to ensure students are going to remember this? Well, if you're teaching visual information, you should probably use visuals. If you're teaching auditory information, you should use auditory. If you're learning how to change a tire of the car, can you watch a video about it, or do you have to go change the tire? You're going to remember it a lot better if you actually do the work of changing the tire, but I'm still going to go watch the video on YouTube first as a reminder, right? Like that. So, multimodal teaching is still promising practice. I want to be clear about that too. But I'm also going to try to not pass that myth on to my students now. So they're not going to waste time doing a survey of their students because unless you are visually impaired, you are a visual learner. Unless you're auditorily impaired, you are an auditory learner, right? So I guess maybe that's the frame for this. That's something I've changed my mind about over the 20-odd years I've been teaching. And maybe it's helpful to have a protocol for this. I don't know. So the protocol I like is I used to think, but now I think. I used to think learning styles were an important thing and that I should try to tailor my teaching to my students' learning styles. And now I think, different kids do have different preferences for things, but I'm not going to overemphasize that. I'm going to ensure strong pedagogy that aligns my methods to the learning targets.
Right. I like that.
I like the language of multimodal versus learning styles. I think that's really helpful for me personally. So thanks for that. Abby, how about you? There's probably a wide range of things, but what comes to your mind?
Man. Like you said, what haven't I changed my mind about?
Right? Absolutely.
Well, I think that I'm going to talk about one of the themes that kind of runs through my grad work, which I'm still in kind of the thick of and so is on my mind. So that's what I'm going to talk about, has been really opening up my eyes to the diversity of learning experiences for people across the country, and also the diversity that's necessary, I think, in our own classrooms, as far as experiences that we portray or expose kids to along race, socioeconomic, cultural, all kinds of different levels. Because I tend to have taught, obviously, in a place that was very homogeneous, right? So in Northwest Iowa, my students were diverse in many ways, but they were also all came from very similar homes.
Sure, yeah.
Had very similar backgrounds. And so I used to think that I didn't really need to know that much or put much stock in diversity because the students I taught were not diverse. I wasn't teaching in a place where I had a variety of cultures. I wasn't like everyone. It was a Christian school. They were all came from the same religious background. Some socioeconomic diversity, but not a lot. And so I used to think that really wasn't important in my practice because it wasn't something I dealt with. And now I believe that every single teacher, no matter their student makeup, needs to be equipped to present to their students a wide variety of stories and experiences of people who are very different from them.
Were there particular, I'm probing here, are there particular things that in your grad work that kind of started shifting that thinking?
Well, right away, readings, right? So I realized that my particular school experience was very different from what a lot of students in this country experience, right? For quality, teacher turnover, resources available. It was exceptional on many levels. And also just the experiences of people who are very different from me that I learned with.
Yeah.
So my grad work is through the University of Florida. So just the sheer differences in the people that I encountered from people that I've encountered before, all of whom are dear friends of mine, actually.
Yeah.
Now, right? I stay at their house when I go to Florida. Many of them have spoken in my classes. I'm in contact with them on social media. And so that was part of it, but also just different readings, and also there's a particular TED Talk that kind of sums it up nicely, and we're going to link to it, but it's called The Danger of a Single Story, and it's by a Nigerian writer named Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and she really talks about, she tells the story of growing up in Nigeria, and all of the literature that she could get her hands on was English. So she's a black woman, and everything she read was of children with blonde hair and blue eyes, drinking tea and eating cookies. And so when she started writing, she thought that all of the children in her books had to be the same instead of writing out of her own experience. And she kind of extrapolates that into different stories of her own life, and the danger it is when we're only presented one way of seeing things and how that limits us in our perspective. And so when I think about translating that as an English teacher, right, that means that even if my students all have very similar backgrounds, it's my responsibility as a teacher to also present to them other ways of seeing, so that when they grow up and encounter people who are different from them, they will have a framework, and they will be able to be culturally literate, right, in a way that allows them to be disciples, instead of thinking that their culture and their experience is the only experience.
You're right.
Yeah.
Because it's the only story they've ever known.
It makes me think sometimes that my wonder is just how much conflict exists in the world over assumptions or misunderstood worldviews about who our neighbor is, and to me that's the importance of it, is like we have so much more in common with everyone in the world than we do different. It's like we have so much more in common. It doesn't matter in my mind who it is. We still have more in common than we do different, and yet we focus on those differences mostly because we don't give our students a chance to discover what we have in common. And that's where I think, like, through literature, through image, whatever it is, poetry, the power of exposing that these are my brothers and sisters. These people are made in the image of God, and that's what gives them value, regardless of what they believe, regardless of their background, is that they have value simply because they've been created by God. So
what I love about your story, Abby, is this is about education and how education can change your mind, right?
Yeah.
There's a part of me that immediately thinks, like, isn't that what we ought to be about, right? Like, when you learn things, your thinking will likely change, and that's what we ought to be about in education.
And I just think about how many images that I had before that, through knowing more stories of different people, right, have shifted. So even when you think of people groups, when you think of Native Americans, right, and the more stories that I read and the more that I learn, the more that image, that stereotypical one-dimensional image that I had of a group of people shifts and changes and gets more complex. And that's what I'm talking about, right? We need to, instead of presenting just one story, like, or about slavery, right? If that's the only story that we ever tell about African Americans in this country, that's unfair.
How about you, Matt?
I
changed your mind about
No, I mean, I joked earlier about, like, what haven't I changed my mind? In fact, I wrote the question down, what have I? But what haven't I changed my mind about, right? It's like, because I feel like in some ways that list is smaller. But I one of the things that really came to my mind as you were telling your story, Dave, if I think about, like, when I started teaching years ago in Montana, one of the things that I sort of laugh about now is that I thought my classroom was the most important class in the school.
Oh yeah.
Like
well, it was.
And it was, right? But then I really, I was protective of, like, for sure, math and science, those are but Matt, like what we do here really, like that matters, but this really matters, and almost being like taken aback that students didn't see it the same way I did. So I think my own like the arrogance of that compared to now, where it's like, wow, like we are part of this bigger educational story, right? Like where whether it's in a university or you're in, middle school or elementary school, that all of these classes are opportunities for students to develop the gifts we know that God has given them, but also to discover gifts that they don't even know that they have. And just looking back at the arrogance of thinking that was really going to happen in English more than anywhere else, it's laughable now. But that's honestly one of the first things that I came is just like, I think just an understanding of how we're all contributing to forming and shaping these students. Like we've talked about education as formation, and that happens across our students' experiences in every class. So that's one thing that came to mind. I think the other thing maybe is just a deepening, and maybe this goes to what Abby is talking about a bit, is just a deeper understanding or maybe an appreciation or maybe a respect that our students' experiences outside of school shape their experiences inside of school, right? Like this, like just an understanding that what's going on in a student's life outside of the classroom is really big, and it's actually really important. And how might and to not expect students to actually park that, but actually to invite them to bring those experiences into the classroom and to create sort of this safe and brave space where that's okay. Like we invite that actually, right? Is to say, hey, like maybe this 1 hour or this 6 hours in a school are your safest 6 hours of the day, and how do we embrace that and find the grace for those students to be, you know what, like maybe today we're just glad you're here. It's good that you're here with us today. And so I just think a deepening understanding of that. I've just seen so many students whose experience, they have gone through very hard things, and you just want school to be a place where they're with friends, and I don't think I totally understood that, and I still think I'm deepening my understanding of that, and maybe that has also just come with how my experiences have shaped me, right? Like I know what the hard things and the good things in my life, how that impacts me. So then now make yourself a 6 or 8 or 10-year-old, 15-year-old student who you're still learning. You're trying to figure all of that out without that life experience. How much more so? So that would be the second thing. And then the last thing, I think we don't have to talk too much about it. I just think this idea of like, what do we mean when we use the word rigor, right? Like when I was a rigorous teacher because I gave lots of meaningless and useless homework. Like I realize that now, right? It was around. I used to think quantity of homework was sort of the definition of what makes a rigorous learning experience, which again is laughable now.
But it's so programmed.
Oh yeah, totally it is. And I had to deprogram. I
even have to still sometimes, right? Struggle against that idea.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, right? Because I've done this myself as a principal, so this is not throwing any teacher under the bus, I hope, but it's this idea of sort of like, well, when you're a senior in high school, you should have 2 to 3 hours of homework, and I like sort of like, well, 10 minutes per. Well, let's not talk about like 2 to 3 hours of homework. How much meaningful homework are we giving, right? And so for me, that it is programmed, and there was sort of like this expectation from. I would feel that as administration, and I would put that expectation as an administrator, right? You'd get suspicious if there wasn't homework, right? And
what's going on
in that classroom? And well, maybe good learning is what's going on. Yeah. And so I just think about that word rigor and homework and busy work, and so those are just. I mean, like I said, you could just take the last so many years, and I think if I think about it when I started to now, and I think so much has changed. And I hope, and honestly, I hope for all of us that in 10 years or 1 year or 5 years, we could have this same discussion, right? Like it should always be changing, I think.
That's sort of the point.
I'm gonna lean into that just a little bit though, right? Because I think there are a lot of things that we should ask questions about and we should change our mind about, right? And the things we're talking about, we're thinking about pedagogy, we're thinking about students' needs and cultural demands, and maybe even our philosophy of education starts to shift over time. But I wonder about that. Are there things that we should never change our mind about as teachers? And I don't have a good answer for that question. But I know there's some things I've become more sure of as I've taught too.
Yeah.
Or my understanding has changed or deepened about.
Right. And I think that's part of the process too, right? Like changing my mind doesn't mean, well, I used to think, but now I think this is, I used to think, and now I really think.
Right.
Like that, sometimes that's the way it is.
Right. So for example, we talk a lot in Ed Psych about our students as image bearers, and that's a very foundational element to teaching Christianly.
I'm not going to let go of that one.
No, never. Yeah. But also, I don't think I really knew what that meant when I was 23. Right? And so my pedagogy, well, I believed that and said I believed that and did believe that, my pedagogy did not always reflect that belief, right? So I have learned over the years how that belief plays itself out in my teaching much more deeply than I understood when I was a beginning teacher. So I like that. Like I used to think, and now I really think, because I understand more deeply.
And so maybe the heart of this whole thing is if we're serious about teachers being models of lifelong learning, right? We talk a lot about lifelong learning for our students, but for us too, that means we're going to keep developing. And developing means sometimes we're going to let go of things we used to think, and sometimes it means we're going to recommit ourselves to things we've really now said, this is how I think it is.
I mean, that's a good point, because if there is like a first or second or third year teacher here, my worry then in listening to that, and I think that's super helpful, Dave, is that I don't want them to get the message, well, you just wait in 20 years, you're gonna look back at what you're doing, and they're
like I got it all figured out.
Totally, right? Like that there are things that you're doing in your first, second, third year that are good things.
And you will keep doing
and you will keep doing, and you should keep doing that. And I think that's important actually to say too, right? To say, and I think just like we talked about, is like that was my experience for me. Right, I was pretty immature when I started teaching. I had a lot of room for growth. I look at some of the students I even interact with here in my classes, like, oh my word, they're so much further ahead than where I was when I was 21 or 22 years old. So it's not like, hey, you don't know anything, and now you're gonna figure it all out in 20 years. That's why I like the language
Do you feel like as a profession, everyone kind of keeps moving forward a bit as well, right? So maybe we know more collectively that we pass on to our students at undergrad level that just wasn't available 20 years ago. For example, learning styles.
I would definitely agree with that, right? Like and that's not, again, to critique my undergrad program, right? Like I've had a great education, but I do feel like people are able to start out better than I was able to, because we know more.
And I hope in 20 years that's true when we're long gone from this place.
For sure.
That maybe some of the students we're teaching out here are going to be sitting in our offices having this conversation, saying, well, that Beamers guy or that Mulder, like that was great, but now we know so much more. And that should be true. We should hope for that, actually, right?
That's right. Because we keep learning.
We do keep learning. No, that's helpful, I think, to end with that idea of hey, I used to think, but now I know, but I used to think, but now I'm actually deepening even my understanding. No, thanks for that. Folks, we know that your time is valuable, and we want to thank you for joining us today for another hallway conversation. And whether it is this day, this week, this month, or the upcoming school year, we do hope that the Lord gives you what you stand in need of. We want to thank you for the good, God-delighting work that you're doing in your schools and your communities. And as you go into this week, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace, and give you peace. Amen. Have a good week, everyone. Thank you.
This podcast was quite literally dreamed up during one of our actual hallway conversations. Our music is by Ethan Mulder. Hallway Conversations is an independent podcast created and produced by Matt Beamers, Abby DeGroat, and Dave Mulder. Thanks for listening.